What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Hops Geek News, a podcast that talks about comic books, movies, TV shows, and of course, we feature Beer of the Week. Aside from that, if you're looking for other things from us, you can find us at thenerdinitiative.com, where I currently write comic book reviews weekly on the Nerd Initiative Bullpen. A lot of great things that are coming out of there. So please go check out our reviews. We're kind of trying to build up the comic book world, build the positivity within it as well. So check that out. I am Matt. With me is Lauren. You can find us Hops Geek News, any podcasting platform, any social media platform. That's where we are. I am on Twitter acting a fool. Lauren handles things more on the Instagram side of things. And then we are both old and figure out the TikTok thing, right? So find us everywhere. We are there. And if you feel like supporting the show at all, patreon.com/hopsgeeknews. Everything goes right into the show. We use it for making a better product, going to comic
Zoom and stickers.
Zoom stickers. And then actually I'm going to be within a 3-hour radius of 3 different Comic-Cons once I move to Virginia. So I will be at all 3 of those Comic-Cons. Lauren's going to get guilted maybe
I'll be at
coming to those. And so come say hello, support the show. We got a great guest today. Josh Trujillo is on with us today. He wrote a fantastic comic a few months ago, a 6-issue limited series, Blue Beetle Graduation Day. And we'll get into that in just a second. What I am drinking because of this show, because he also has a really good comic coming out that kind of wraps into it. And this is also from Los Angeles, from 14 Cannons Brewery. It's called Wreck Yo Ship. It's a triple IPA brewed with massive tropical aroma, triple dry hopped with Citra, Laurel, and God bless, me and names, Matuika hops. It's 10.5.
Matuika. I usually know it. You just messed me up.
Glasses. I'm blind. I am blind. I can't hear you. I'm blind. But yeah, there's a cannon. If you happen to be in that area, it's a limited 2023 release. It's in Westlake Village in California. It's not LA proper, but it's right outside near the Agora Hills area. Check it out. Went there a few months ago or a month ago now for a wedding. There it is. Lauren, what you got?
So my beer is actually not themed because I found a Calusa that I didn't know was in there. So this may be the first time ever I try to think of something. I mean, it's pretty and the artwork in the comic is pretty, so I can go with that. It's the Imperial Zote Double IPA from Calusa Brewing in Sarasota, Florida. I usually drink Tactical, Tripping Animals, or Calusa. I was very excited to find this, but I do have it in a Wonder Woman glass. So at least I'm in with the DC Comics. I don't have a Blue Beetle glass.
I don't.
One day.
Roosevelt's, if you happen to check out this, because I wear your shirts every time, do a Blue Beetle drop. I'm excited for that. You have the DC license. Do a Blue Beetle drop. My kids are wicked excited for the movie. That's all they've been talking about. And I actually had the pleasure of meeting our guest back in it was like February at this point at the Emerald City Comic-Con. We were walking. My son loves Blue Beetle. Obviously, I do too. And I stumbled upon his table, chatted with him, and then we bought the very first issue, which he was gracious enough to sign for my son. And then I tried to Apple Pay him, come back to the hotel. I got a rejection thing, and I panicked because I was like, oh, shit. It didn't go through, and I freaked out, messaged
Those
him.
cons never have good service.
Well, I wanted to make sure I paid for this. So, I'm panicking, like having an anxiety attack. But he was cool enough, paid him the next day. So I want to welcome our guest, Josh. Welcome to the show. Introduce yourself. And I know you have a beer, so go ahead and introduce that as well.
Yeah, I'm Josh Trujillo. I'm a writer. I'm a comic book guy. I'm based in LA. I write for Blue Beetle right now for DC Comics. In the past, I've written for Captain America for Marvel, Hulkling and Wiccan, Rick and Morty, all sorts of different various things. And today I'm drinking, was it Brooklyn Brewery's Pulp Art? It's a hazy IPA. I love a hazy IPA. The hazier, the better. So it's a nice, it's a nice compliment to kind of this like awful heat we're going through right now in LA.
God, it's so hot everywhere. Like there's no escaping it. It's hot everywhere. The great climate wars have begun because
even our ocean is hot now. Because I'm in Florida. Yeah, the Keys got down to up to 100 degrees. Apparently, it's terrible for the coral.
Oh my God!
I got that from my husband, so don't quote me. I didn't read the article myself, but yeah, it's the waters are not doing great. And that, I could go into a whole thing on that. Even like with the sharks and some of the sharks with their egg sacs, like they're born too soon because they're getting too much of they need more nutrients and the heat. They're not, a lot of bad stuff. But we're here to talk about
Now
good
that
stuff.
Lauren brought us down, yes, let's talk about the good stuff.
It's Shark Week still here. Okay. So we want to hear a bit about your origin story too, because you don't just wake up and say, hey, I want to write comic books without falling in love with comic books first. So what is your geek origin story? How did you get into the whole world of comics?
Yeah. So, as long as I can remember, someone's been reading comic books to me, or I've been reading them to myself. So, that was my grandparents reading me the Sunday Funnies, Garfield, Blondie, Calvin and Hobbes was a big one, Snoopy, obviously. But I would trace over the Garfield strips and rearrange them. And that's where I think I learned a little bit about kind of sequential art is if panel 2 is now panel 3, that changes the story, right? And then you could come up with your own words and things. So from an early age, I was already playing around with kind of what I saw as the nuts and bolts. But that's all I've ever wanted to do, much to the detriment of any other possible avenue in my life. But, I drew comics for myself throughout junior high and middle school and high school and even in college a little bit. But I tried a couple of different things like journalism. It never really panned out. I ended up working in restaurants and Disneyland for over 10 years and worked in the service industry for too long. And somehow I just never gave up. I took internships at comic book companies. I volunteered at booths. I went to every convention I could. And then eventually I started to save money and self-publish. And then from there, I was able to self-publish, not enough to break even, because you'll never break even in comics, but at least to get the attention of editors. And they saw, oh, he's a real person who makes real comic books. Maybe he'd be good for this 2-page short, this 4-page short. And so I've been doing comics like that for probably 8 or 9 years now. And so I'm very grateful that it and video games have kind of become my full-time career.
That's awesome. Now we have to go back a second. We literally before this recorded an episode about classic rides at Disney World and Disneyland.
Oh,
so what did you
love? Yeah, we love Disneyland.
Well, I live in Orlando, and I took my kids out to Disneyland for spring break. So what did you do when you worked at Disneyland?
Yeah, so I worked there in a couple different capacities, but the big ones I did was I worked at the Winnie the Pooh ride and I worked on the Splash Mountain ride. I pushed buttons and I made magic and I told people to stay inside the vehicle. And you do that every day, all day. It's the best first job anyone could ever have. Honestly, out of high school, such a fun work environment, and you get to meet 40,000 new people every single day, and you have to deal with every kind of problem. And so you just you learn on your feet really quickly. But later I came back after I worked in restaurants, and I was a restaurant manager and a bartender at this restaurant called Ariel's Grotto. So it was considered fine dining for children, which meant goldfish crackers served on a nice plate. Yeah, the PBs and J's and silver and elevated rice-a-roni and things like that. But the princess would come by your table every time. So between each course, you'd meet Cinderella or Rapunzel or whoever. And so that was really stressful because the bottom floor is the fine dining element. The top floor is a full service bar, and you have to run both of them at the same time. Oh. So you get really upset children on the bottom floor, and you get really upset
drunk adults
on the top floor.
It's hard to decipher who's worse, right? At that point, give me the upset children, because at least you can sometimes reason with them.
Oh, I've seen some stuff at Epcot with some drunk Disney adults. Yeah, sometimes it gets a little.
Epcot is the home for that, right? Is because you just drink around the world at all those different pavilions.
Oh, yeah, it's my favorite park. Actually, Food and Wine started this morning. I was going to try to go, and the kids had zero interest in going to Epcot this morning.
Oh, so jealous.
Same.
I love Epcot. Okay, so let's pull it back. So you've written comics for Marvel, DC, Dark Horse. So you just told us about how you got into that, but what are some of your favorite comic book creators that have kind of inspired you or that you've just enjoyed over the years?
Oh, yeah. Let's see. I mean, a lot of the Sunday morning gang were people I really look up to, like Bill Watterson. I will always respect kind of how anti-commercial he is with those characters, how he refuses to kind of merchandise them. That didn't make sense to me as a kid who wanted a Calvin and Hobbes plushie. Oh, but as an adult who creates stuff, I'm this is the most rock star thing you could possibly do. But beyond that, I really love I loved Mark Waid growing up. I loved even like, Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One. Everyone gets into those stories. I was reading Ultimate Spider-Man as it came out. So like all 100 and however many issues that was. But, I thought I loved that, like that cadence of like a monthly or even more than monthly book, because the book was selling so well. They were doing it like every 3 weeks or something. But just kind of like real meat and potato superheroes. And then like later stuff like Alan Heinberg and on Young Avengers, or I liked Mark and Draco on Manhunter a lot. That was a big book for me. Gotham Central with Ed Brubaker. That was huge. And honestly, just like, oh gosh, Justice League International, the Giffen DeMatteis stuff, like all of it. The DC universe kind of opened up itself to me earlier than the Marvel universe. Mm-hmm. But I still have a lot of like Runaways was an incredibly huge book for me. And so like a lot of those younger Marvel characters are the ones I gravitated towards.
Oh, which is interesting considering you just did Blue Beetle, because obviously that's a young character as well. So I love that you said that your origin story is the comic strips, because whenever we talk about our origin story, I always say, I didn't get into comics until I was an adult, because I didn't start reading them until I was an adult. But as a child, I read Calvin and Hobbes, and I read Far Side, and I read the Snoopy comics. So I never even thought that could be an origin story. So that's really cool that you said that.
Oh yeah, I love those books. So I had the big fatty collections of everything I checked out from the library over and over again.
I used to love reading them. Like it would make me feel smart as a kid to get the Sunday funnies, and you read those comic strips. I'm like, yeah, I'll take that section of the newspaper at 10 years old.
It's definitely like a lost art these days too. Like you don't just.
I don't even know if it still happens.
Like well, not to mention like some of them just came out to be shitty people too. So it's like a lost art of reading the Sunday funny. So everybody's comic. It's interesting to see the comic book origins that we had and where they're going to be in 10 years for kids like our kids' age, for example.
Oh yeah, like this just dates me, but like webcomics were not a major thing when I was growing up. Whereas like everyone grew up with like Homestar Runner or all sorts of other prominent web cartoons.
And comics like weren't cool when we were also getting into them either. So now they're like these massive, like, you're not reading comics, what's wrong with you? And it's just, I love that generational shift. It's
yeah. I used to never read comics in public. Now I'll whip them out on an airplane. I don't care anymore.
Oh yeah. My backpack is full of comics on airplanes all the time.
Yeah. That's it's a great way to catch up, because my stack's getting bigger because I've been reading the Thrawn books. So my comic stack is huge right now. So you've written many different characters. You just listed a few of them beforehand. Are there some characters you enjoy writing more, or some characters that are easier to write?
Yeah. They all present their challenges. You write a character that you love really deeply, like Scarlet Witch, for example, and she has a big fandom. So you have those expectations kind of waiting for you. And so you kind of have to work kind of to align with what you think the audience is looking for sometimes, while still telling the story you want to tell. But the characters that come easier to me right now are kind of these younger voiced characters. I co-created a character called Aaron Fisher with Christopher Cantwell and Jan Bazaldua. He's the gay Captain America, the Captain America of the railways. And I just did a 6-part arc for him on Marvel Unlimited. And I'm really happy with how that one turned out. But Blue Beetle, Jaime Reyes is my guy. I find his voice really easy to latch onto, probably because we were very similar when we were that age. I'd say right now it's the younger class. And then also it's always fun to write the cosmic characters that are older than the concept of aging. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I am eternity and stuff. Like it's a good balance.
I feel like there's definitely a lot of like wiggle room. For example, we're going to get into Blue Beetle in a second, but there's a lot of like, we can all kind of put ourselves in the shoes of Jaime, for example, because he's a teenager, and in graduation day, it's all about, hey, what are you doing if like your friends are going to college, and choosing your own path of sorts, which for a lot of us, we could put our shoes in. And so it was very easy to relate to it. I know for me, because I went through this, I didn't go to college until I was like 24 or something like that. And so I could very easily relate to something that, and to a degree, of course. But yeah, and then of course the older characters. I always love reading the older characters, because how do you write somebody who's older than the universe themselves, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. That was a very dry humor. It seems like it's It's like the pop culture references go over their head. But yeah, teenagers are hard to write. And you can see that when you watch certain things, because they're either, treating the teenager like they're way older than they are and treating them like an adult when they're not an adult. They're still developing their brain and learning things, and they still need guidance. And then there's other times where the teenagers are treated like infants and have no choice and are always, seated at the kids' table. So it's hard to find that balance. And so, yeah, let's move into Blue Beetle Graduation Day, because I felt like you nailed that balance. I felt like
without a doubt.
I got, you get a little bit of almost like that Spider-Man vibe of, he's struggling school and work, and he's always late to everything. And I'm a little more Marvel, so that's what I always do with DC. I'm always like, it's like this Marvel character.
I'm a DC guy through and through.
Yeah, so we like to keep balance on this podcast. He thinks Batman vs Superman was a great movie. I don't, so we have balance.
God, we're bringing old shit again.
That will never die. Much like Martha, because someone will always save her. So yeah, let's go into this. So while the original Blue Beetle is obviously been around forever in the comic book world, as far as pop culture, I personally only knew the newer version from Smallville. That's my only introduction until I actually read your comic book, was that, and I think he was only in one episode.
Smallville?
Yes. And I didn't even realize until I Googled it, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that episode.
Mine was...
But I watched Smallville a year ago for the first time.
Or Young Justice, I should say. That's where I really got acquainted with him, from the animated cartoon Young Justice.
But in general, he is a newer character in pop culture. So with him being newer to a majority of the population, what are you hoping anybody who's read Blue Beetle Graduation Day takes away about this specific character?
Yeah. So, Jaime Reyes, he's a Mexican-American teenager. He grew up in El Paso, Texas, with his loving family, who are way too involved in his life. And, a mystical sci-fi alien scarab beetle falls from the sky and lands on his back, basically. And now he's a superhero. He's not the first Blue Beetle. There's at least two others that we know about, Dan Garrett and Ted Kord, who's a big fan favorite and a favorite of mine too. But he's a regular kid who's dealing with these extra worldly problems, and he's trying to navigate the DC universe in a way that I think is really relatable. There's a lot of there could be a lot of grim and gritty when you get up to the higher echelons of power, but Jaime has the most powerful artifact in the DC universe attached to his spine, and he's still a happy-go-lucky kid. And so when he enters a situation, he brings a lot of, I think, levity and life into it that maybe it wasn't there before. And I love the original run with John Rogers and Keith Giffen and Coley Hamner, Raphael Albuquerque, throwing him against the oddball corners of the DC universe, whether it be Lobo or Phantom Strange or Next Issue or whoever. There was always a new threat for him, and there was always something for me, the reader, to learn about the DC universe as I was reading the book. Because I think a lot of people who are reading Blue Beetle back then, maybe people who are reading Graduation Day and the new series now, this might be their only DC book. So this is their window to seeing how cool the DC universe is. And Jaime is our journeyman through that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, you absolutely do a wonderful job. Basically, you give that window into the DC universe. You bring all the other Justice League characters in, but at the core of the story, it's very easy when you start playing with other characters to forget what it's about. But the way you guys and your team kept it grounded was, hey, no, at the end of the day, this is very much a Jaime
Blue Beetle
story.
comic.
This is a Blue Beetle story, and it really fleshes itself out through those 6 issues, which again, it's not easy to do. And so hats off to you and the team for basically keeping that heart in the middle of the story.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. This was a big imperative of our editor, Andrew Marino, who's really been with us from the very beginning. As you may have known, we started working on a Blue Beetle pitch years ago, and kind of just through a happy coincidence of events, we were able to get Graduation Day going. But, heart and family have always been at the center of those books. And it was really important for us not to lose Jaime and kind of the sea of superheroes we're going to throw at him, but also to kind of center the book still around family, even though he's away from the family he grew up with, he still has a family here in Palmyra City, the new city that he's inhabiting.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get set up on this? Was this a story that you pitched to DC, or were they kind of playing with the idea of Blue Beetle? How did you guys end up coming up with this storyline, for instance?
Yeah. So let's see, years ago, I want to say like 5 years ago, which just shows how long these things can take sometimes. But there was interest from DC to do some Blue Beetle with me, but we didn't know what shape that would be. It's like, maybe we'll do a one shot, or maybe we'll do like a tie-in to some event or something. And so because of like editors changing over and cosmic events happening and whatever, it kind of just kept getting pushed to the side. And then DC Comics had a competition called Round Robin, where they had different creative teams kind of vie for the opportunity to do a complete miniseries. So the fans would vote on which creative team they wanted to win, what book sounded more appealing to them, and the winner would get a full miniseries. Spoiler alert: we did not win. We lost to a book by Tim Seeley called Robins, which you should go check out. But our fans did not let DC forget about us. And every time there would be a new, here are the new books for the month, people would be like, where's Blue Beetle? Where's Graduation Day? But as for the story itself, like, we knew we wanted to take Jaime to kind of the next chapter of his life. I think there are still a lot of great stories to be told with like high school superheroes. But for Jaime, I felt like it was ready to give him some energy behind him, give him a little bit of momentum. And the story that appealed to me was like, I think the natural path for a lot of teenage characters in fiction is like they go straight to college, right? Like there's no alternative for them. But knowing the people that I know in my life, knowing my own experience, that wasn't a surefire thing at all. And there were a lot of doubts. A lot of people go straight into the working world. A lot of people go into other technical schools. They don't necessarily go to university. And that's not to say that Jaime won't ever go to school. It's just that right now he has a lot on his plate. If you're saving the world every week, you don't necessarily study for your AP exams, And
right.
So I wanted to give him that kind of element of like, you have all this potential, but what are you going to do with it? You have to make up your mind, Jaime. You have to pick a lane. And he's still kind of figuring that out in our story.
Yeah.
And I honestly feel like every 18-year-old does. It's like, even if you're going to college, you still aren't certain what you want to do. Like, I last minute decided to go to community college for my freshman year because I didn't want to leave home. I wasn't ready. And like, the kids are still kids. Your brain's still developing until you're 25.
You're
so
told
it's
to make these like life altering decisions at the age of 17, 18.
The idea of picking your major at 18 is insane.
Yeah, absolutely.
I originally was going to be a history teacher, and I didn't decide until I was 28 to switch into marketing, for example. So it's like we force people and we put so much pressure on these kids to just, hey, it's time to grow up already. Okay, as soon as you graduate high school, you better have a job. You better be doing
just keep taking out those loans. You'll be fine.
Take out all those student loans you're never going to be able to pay back, for example. And it's just insane.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of like, I think we're turning a corner, right? It's like young people should have a lot of options available to them. They should have a lot of options. Just like, what do you want to do with your life? Have the time to figure it out. Because so many of us just feel like we're pushed into a corner, and Jaime feels like he's pushed into a corner to have to be a superhero and to be this like upstanding model teenager.
Even while being forced into being a superhero at the same time, you do a wonderful job showcasing that the Justice League, aka Batman, still treats him like a child. And so one of my favorite personal sequences from the story was when Jaime and even Superman were basically like, no, we need to trust him. Like Batman, F off, for example. Trust him, showcase, let him follow his lead for once. And I think just the way that blended together was it
was well done. Yeah.
Very well done.
Because you expect those certain tropes, no matter whether you're reading a comic, watching a TV show, or watching a movie. There are certain tropes that you tend to expect that's coming. And when that doesn't happen, it's always very refreshing. Yes. And I think that's, what people love about, certain things like Deadpool or anything that's like, or Black Mirror, all those things where you're like, I know how this is going to end. And then it doesn't end like that. And that's always so refreshing to see. And obviously I don't want to ruin too much of it, but I think one of you were saying, I went to my comic book shop and Blue Beetle Graduation Day was gone. I had to get the virtual ones from Amazon. Yeah, because that's always where I want to buy all my comics. I like having in my hand and I like supporting the comic book shop. But yeah, it was sold out. So it's doing great. Except Matt has that beautiful little signed copy there.
Yeah.
I have the signed copy of issue 1. I was lucky enough to pick out this is This is the issue from the infamous, me in my hotel room after my son decided after 5 minutes he didn't want to walk anymore, because every 7-year-old just focuses on food and everything else but enjoying themselves. But yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull back a lot of our notes we've already actually talked about. So I did notice in one of Jaime's shirts actually says Xolo. Is that a nod to the actor who's going to be playing him?
Yeah, it's a big nod from our artist, Adrian Gutierrez, my Blue Beetle brother. He's been a delight to work with. And this is the longest. Well, we'll talk about the other project, the Washington State General, where I worked with the artist a lot. But I wake up to new pages every single day from Adrian and our colorist Will Quintana and our incredible letterer Lucas Gattoni. But every so often, Adrian will put in these Easter eggs. And I was like, did I tell him to put that in? So what will happen is I'll create a Google folder of here's some cool looks that Jaime could wear when he's not in superhero mode. And so he'll see that and be he'll just add his little details. And so it's funny. We just got this kind of, I guess I can share this. He and I just got messaged by Xolo himself on social media, and just to let us know that how much he was looking forward to the new series and how much he's looking forward to the new villain we're introducing, and that everyone's a big fan of what we do, which meant what? That's crazy. So
that's awesome.
You just write Xolo and he comes and lets you know you like.
Well, and that makes you probably, yeah, and it probably makes you feel better about the character who's bringing this character to life. If he's that invested in the comic, that he's got heart in the character already. Because those are, I feel the people, you look at someone Ashley Eckstein, who is so obsessed with being Ahsoka. She is encased that character, and she does that character justice with everything she does because she loves it so much. So it's nice to see that he's embracing the origin of the character and loves the character so much already. Well, so that was a fun little nod.
Not for nothing, he also is kind of the first character. Something beautiful about Blue Beetle, he's kicking off the new DCU as well. This is the first movie that takes place in that new universe that they've all established at this point. So it's very cool that.
And we all fell in love with him at Cobra Kai.
Yes.
Oh, he was so good in Cobra Kai. Yeah. I'm sure we all saw him in that, the Blue Beetle fans, and we're like, he'd be a great Jaime. And then he got cast, and it was like, oh, well, this is a no-brainer. Here we go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I know Lauren and I were talking about it. Why isn't he cast as some sort of superhero at this point? And then, of course, when the casting came out, we're like, duh, this makes perfect sense. And you can just tell from the trailers alone, they're having a ton of fun in that movie.
And they're doing so much fighting that they've learned in Cobra Kai for sure. Yeah. Anytime I fall in love with an actor in anything, I'm like, why aren't they in Marvel, Star Wars, or DC? They deserve more. I need to see them in these other things that I love. So you mentioned working with the artists. So, most of our guests who are comic book creators are Kickstarter comic book creators. So there's a lot of back and forth and having to research with the artist. So having worked for Marvel and especially DC in this particular project, how was that process with the artist? Do you get to pick the artist? Is the artist assigned to you? And is there a lot of back and forth, or is your idea pretty quickly put onto the page?
Yeah. So, Adrian and I were kind of we're paired off by our editor, Andrew, and it worked out honestly from the beginning. We both wanted to do, all three of us rather, wanted to do a really youthful book that drew from elements of Sentai, drew from elements of Japanese manga, and drew from elements of high octane superhero storytelling. And so Adrian's style is very youthful and energetic and has a lot of momentum to it. And so that lined up really well with the kind of story I wanted to tell. I'm happy to have a scene of two characters just sitting there around the table, but we will never get that from Adrian. He will always find the most interesting angles or the way to find the excitement in the scene. And it really elevates the story I'm trying to tell so much, as I just try to get out of his way sometimes and also give him the hardest job in the world, where it's in issue 5 of Graduation Day. It has 22 different characters in it. And I had to write this apology email to Adrian before I got the script. I was like, just so you know, this has a lot of characters and they don't have to be in every panel. And I'm so sorry. But that was just the way the story was unfolding. And every so often I'll throw him a curveball like that. And he always rises to the occasion.
So whose idea was it to have the characters with their logos when they first showed up?
That was kind of me. That's my nerdy thing.
So cool.
That was awesome.
We have the best letterer in comics, Lucas Gattoni. So he letters the book in English as well as in Spanish because the book is available in Spanish. You can get graduation day collections and the new #1 in Spanish as well. But the rule I try to do is whenever we're introducing a character that has a logo or should have a logo, we do that. So whether it be like someone like Batman or someone like more obscure like Black Condor or even Victoria Cord, Lucas threw together a quick logo for her that I'm like, I want this on a t-shirt actually.
I can fully agree because every time there's a new like logo with the name, I'm like, oh wow, this is like a simple black t-shirt with the logo and name on it. I'm sold because I'm a simple.
Well, that's how you know they're important, right? You're like, oh,
yes,
this character got a logo. Okay.
It's like because it stands out from the typical writing, and it's the amount of characters in issue 5 because that's when you really introduce the Justice League, and there's so much happening. Is it the Reach? All sorts of things going on. And you guys, it was like poetry, just reading it between the art and sometimes saying things without actually saying things. And you can tell straight from the get-go, as you said, the pairing was a hit from the start. If folks haven't read this, it's literal poetry on a page. If you want to read it, which I highly recommend, please get the physical copy because there's nothing really like the physical copy. Such a fantastic job.
Yeah, and it's always fun to get to know the characters before the movie comes out because that's to me how I got into comics. I wanted to know more about the origin of these characters. And sometimes I feel like reading them on the page, you get more of an idea of who they are. Okay. So you obviously this is a DC comic and you worked for Marvel and Dark Horse. As far as the art process, was it similar with those other comic book labels or is it a little bit different with each one?
It's pretty similar. I would say that like with the Blue Beetle book, because we've worked together on so many, we're working on issue 3 right now. So we've done almost 200 pages of Blue Beetle comics together now, which is incredible to think about for me. But like we have a great back and forth. Like I wake up to pages, I give my notes, he has revisions done by the end of the day, and we move on to the next page. Whereas like sometimes for like I did these Hulkling and Wiccan comics for Marvel Unlimited, which are the Unlimited comics are kind of their own thing. But I worked with the last one was Takedo Koro, this incredibly talented mangaka. And I would kind of just send my scripts out and I wouldn't see the return pages until basically the entire chapter was done. And so that was a different approach, right? Instead of being kind of like panel by panel, page by page, it's just like, here's the storytelling. And they do that for a reason. It's because the way these Unlimited comics read on Marvel, it's a scrolling app. It's a scroll. It's not like you're turning a page. It's like one long image you're looking at on your phone. And so your eye follows downward. And so the only way it makes sense to read is by doing the entire thing at once almost. So that's kind of a little in the weeds, but that's how the sausage gets made.
I love those kind of things. I love seeing the behind the scenes things. I'm
yes,
kind of a nerd.
We're big on the fun facts and stuff.
And so obviously you have a upcoming series in September that launches out of the final issue of Graduation Day. We can't spoil anything. We can talk about it, but what can you tell us? What can you get people hyped up about this upcoming series that you guys have coming out?
Yeah, so Jaime Reyes is back. He's in Palmera City, his new home, with his new beetles. We've got our yellow beetle, Dynastus. We've got our green beetle, Natita. We've got Starfire. We've got Ted Cord. We've got Victoria Cord. What is she up to? And we have a whole new cast.
Or buying from thieves, obviously.
She's up to something.
I still don't trust her.
I would not do that. And so, we've got a whole cast of characters. Jaime has a whole team, basically, of superheroes behind him now, and they're all looking to him for answers. So he has to figure out how to step up and really be the leader. The problem is that there's a new foe, or maybe I should say an old foe, from kind of the origins of the Blue Beetle mythos, who's coming back and going to strike at Jaime where it hurts the most. So this is our upcoming Scarab War storyline, and there's going to be some fighting happening. There's going to be some drama. Going to be some big superhero action.
Blue Beetle Jaime Reyes is the Dom Toretto of the DC universe. Just throwing it out there. So
no, he absolutely is. I think about that. I have a Dominic Toretto Lego figure.
Oh my God, I have it too.
His Dodge Charger, and I have the little.
I do too.
Makes me. I want to set up a little lighting package,
yeah,
or sound effect or something.
You just get it, man. I just want you to know, you just get it, because I am obsessed with that franchise as well, and so I have that exact same Lego set. You just understand. He gets it, folks. I love it. And
as soon as he jumped in, yeah, I knew.
Look, I can't go an episode without talking about Fast and Furious. I'm sorry. It's just how I'm wired at this point. And so before we shift gears for just a second and wrap up, what is something that you hope that folks get out of your story of Blue Beetle, and what are you hoping that they kind of just pull, if there's only one thing, maybe two things that they take from the entire run that you guys are doing?
I think the big thing for me with Jaime is he leads with his heart, he leads with his empathy, and despite, or maybe because he has so much power, he has this real care and compassion for everyone around him. And he feels this weight of, that kind of responsibility to care for the people in your life too. And so I hope that people see that Jaime is, as much as we kind of beat him down a little bit, because you got to kick the hero around a little bit in their own book. Yeah. Jaime is in the big leagues. He's Superman in my mind, and I just hope the world wakes up to it.
He honestly, the Scarab is, they even allude to it in this story run, is a world ender if it could be, but he's learned how to control it, which takes a lot of power, as you kind of discover. And you're 100% right. He is a heavy hitter. I hope people take his power sets seriously, because again, he's a very powerful being, and he could honestly go toe to toe with anybody in the Justice League, in my opinion. Yeah.
And sometimes he's a little, I think people think of him as being on the outskirts of the DC universe. And I don't think that's true, especially you'll see in Scarab War. We're tying back to stories that came out 60, 70 years ago. Not that I expect you to dig out your old charlatan comics from the 1950s, but if you did, you would see that I did my homework, and I'm very proud of that.
You should. Yes.
But, there's all this legacy. It's a big theme within the Blue Beetle books. It always has been. And just trying to kind of tie it all together so that classic readers who've been reading since Ted Kord was the hero in the 70s and 60s and 70s and 80s, all the way to today, who've never read a Blue Beetle comic at all, I hope they can tap into this world and see its rich mythos as well.
Absolutely. 100%. And now, before we go ahead and wrap up, there is, by the time this comes out, you have a graphic novel coming out this week that I have read. I don't want to give anything away, but I do want to dive into a little bit real quick. It's called Washington's Gay General, The Legends and Loves of Baron von Steuben. What can you tell us without giving away? Because I know we talked about how the pre-orders have already gotten it at this point, so people have read it. The word is probably,
but I haven't read it, so I don't.
Lauren hasn't read it yet. I have, and you already heard me gush pre-show. What can you tell the general audience about this story?
Yeah, so for the Laurens in the audience, so this is a nonfiction graphic novel. This is all true. Some of it's a little bit larger than life, but that's just the way the guy lived. George Washington had a general that served under him in the Revolutionary War. He was flamboyant. He dressed in outlandish clothing. He was obsessed with his status and his ego. He was in a throuple. He liked to date his younger cadets, and he liked to have underwear parties, or sometimes no underwear parties.
Yeah.
And he was also maybe the most important military leader we've ever had in the United States. So we learned so much about how to run an army, how to discipline soldiers, how to turn these kind of farmers and illiterate farmers basically into a fighting force that can take on the British, who at the time were the most powerful fighting force in the world. This is all because of the contributions of this guy, Baron von Steuben. He came to America late in his life. He fought impression wars up to that point, and he had this established career. But it's really about this great military leader who happened to be what we would now call a gay guy. What does it mean to call someone who lived so long ago gay when that term didn't exist then? What is it? What are the struggles and what are the opportunities that faced someone in that position back then? And also just like we unearthed kind of the fascinating story of how his life kind of weaves through these major wars. And we meet a lot of other figures from that era, whether it be the assistant, his secretary that works for him, or whether it be Frederick the Great, one of the greatest military leaders of all time. We learn kind of about this queer side of history that we've never explored before, or it's rarely been explored before.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Because one of my questions was how much of it is like, did you take any liberties and, make some of it fiction? But you just said it's all nonfiction. So it's
all nonfiction cool. to the best of my ability. But I will say that I pulled from the first biography of his that I could find, which was like 1830. And that was really helpful because it had a lot of like letters from him and stuff. But the downside was it was really like it glorified him in the way that all biographies of Revolutionary War generals glorify the subject matter. And so trying to read between the lines, it doesn't hide the fact that he shared a great love with Benjamin Walker, for example, one of his subordinates, but it doesn't necessarily call it a queer love or a gay love. And there's also, there's a lot of reading between the lines where, a straight reader probably wouldn't think twice about like, oh yeah, he just shared a house with all these young cadets and that's just what they did together. And it's like, well, hold on, Mary.
House. We're cool, guys.
Well, it's like, yeah, how many people in history? Oh, that woman just, she died an old spinster living with her best friend and did so much of that. And there are, because again, like I mentioned before we started recording, my daughter is a history major and she will tell me, she's like, oh yeah, they wanted to say they were roommates and this and that. And she said that there's certain historians that are now pulling some of that information and showing, no, this is what was happening and that is what is happening. And historians in the past have spun it to how they wanted to spin it or how they saw it that wasn't accurate. So it's really cool that you pulled this real information and are laying it. I'm really excited to read this book. I'm very excited.
Yeah, thank you. We did, me and my illustrator, LEvi Hastings, my co-author, we really put our heart into it. And I've never written a nonfiction graphic novel before. He's certainly never drawn one. So we really did the best we could to try to get all the facts right. And what we kept coming up against was that in portraying these figures, even as they were writing letters to each other at the time, they were all lying to each other and building up they were writing towards history as well. They were trying to create their own myth in a way that you see presidents today and stuff kind of do. And so we're trying to pull apart that and figure out who the real people were. And that's been a really interesting challenge because Levi's from Idaho. I'm from Southern California. And we tried to write this thing while the world was shut down.
And I do love that specific aspect where you kind of, one thing that's beautiful about this is you interweave your personal stories in with these historical figures. And it's like, guys, there's so much going on in the world right now. But when you break it down, like we're just human beings trying to live our lives. And that's what von Steuben was. At the end of the day, is like he had things that he loved, and his story is kind of a tragic one as you kind of read throughout. I'm not going to spoil it because again, Lauren, you're uncultured, but it's a very tragic story in the end. And you read about a lot of these guys who they had to take on wives, for example, because we didn't have terminology for X, Y, and Z back in the day. Although really, we could have just lived and just been who you are. And at the end of the day, I took this story as accept yourself for who you are. And it's a little easier said than done, obviously. But Levi did beautiful work mixing in the blues, the whites, the blacks with the artwork, and just the writing alone, how you interwove your personal stories with other historical figures. It's a work of art. And I said this before the show and I'm going to say it now. It's one of the more beautifully well-written graphic novels, comic books, whatever you want to call it, that I have actually read in the last few years.
Oh, that means a lot, and I'm sure it will mean a lot to Levi when I text him immediately after this. But it was a real treat to work on this, and this is such an interesting story to kind of get to tell in some ways for the first time. But we only know so much about Baron von Steuben because of his secretaries, because he was of a certain status and class, and for every von Steuben, there could be a million other lives that are completely undocumented. Like I was saying, a lot of the Revolutionary War soldiers, they weren't necessarily literate, all of them. We don't know a lot about their personal lives. We don't know about their home lives. They could have been in queer relationships. We don't know. And so there's so much that's intentionally left out of history, and so much that is unintentionally left out of history or erased or destroyed or forgotten. And so I hope this book, at least in some way, lifts up his von Steuben reputation, but also uplifts all these other queer figures from the Revolutionary era. I hope a lot of historians now will maybe relook at some of their own collections and see, oh wait, maybe this couple of seamstresses that lived together until they were elderly, maybe there was something else going on there.
Yeah, they weren't just best friends that couldn't find husbands.
To a recent point, I mean, in the military, there was don't ask, don't tell for the longest time. And it's just like, why? Who cares? And I find myself saying this every day. It's like, who fucking cares?
Well, Clinton wanted to make it okay, and then he got backlash. So that was his compromise.
And
it's
so funny to me that, and again,
I did compromise in quotes for anybody just listening.
Yes. Something I said before the show is being in this culture. It's funny to me that at the end of the day, it's like, guys, our doctrine is based off of this. And I have to laugh because it's just, these people are just so ignorant, and it's just like, who cares? Who cares? Let them be humans. Well, and my last question is, how did you end up finding him? Like, how did you find von Steuben? Was this something you sought out, or was it a story that was brought to you? How did this come about to bring you into digging into his life?
Yeah, I wish I could say I was on like a spirit hike and I saw him at the top of some hill. But, LEvi Hastings and I had wanted to work together for a long time. We did a mini comic that was a Revolutionary War gay romance, and it got a little bit of traction. And so we would take that to conventions around the country. And when we went to these conventions, people would approach us and say, oh my God, you need to do a comic about von Steuben. And we're like, that sounds great. Who's von Steuben? And so from there, we started to read books. We started to look online and watch videos. And we're like, oh, there's a lot of meat here. But we'd never done a graphic novel before. And so we did a mini comic for this website called thenib.com. And they do a lot of important nonfiction comics and editorial cartoons. And our little, 25 panel comic about von Steuben's life blew up. It was like, I don't know what is a good number of viewers for a webcomic, but we broke it. And the Nib was like, oh, you became our most viewed comic like overnight. And we were a huge hit for them. And from that, we were able to get a publisher interested, Abrams Comic Arts, and now they're Shirley Imprint, approached us to want to do a full version of that as the book. And so it's one thing to kind of glean a couple different books and a Wikipedia page and sources to do a short comic, but it's another thing to try to find enough material to do like 190 pages or wherever we landed with it. And that was incredibly difficult, I will say. And it's a lot of reading incredibly dry military history books.
It can be very dry, but to a history nerd like me, I mean, it came out perfectly well. Yeah,
I'm a fan of history. The one I was trying to write towards was, I don't know if you've read Sarah Vowell's books, but like The Partly Cloudy Patriot or Assassination Vacation, that was kind of the tone I was looking towards. And like something that a casual reader could pick up and enjoy, but also if you have an appreciation from history, hopefully you can connect this to other stories, other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, at the end of the day, you find yourself during this story, there's emotional beats. And at the end, I was like, dang, there was so much in there that I didn't know. And anytime that you get emotional reactions out of art, out of writing, whatever it is, it's a hit in my book. And that's exactly what this comic book is, I can say at the end of the day. Lauren? I know you got something.
And I'm sure there's an extra level to it too, because, you know, it's nonfiction. And for me, anytime I'm reading or watching anything that's nonfiction and something, you know, tragic or anything emotional happens, it hits different, because that's the thing. A lot of times when we learn history, like sometimes we have to detach ourselves from it so that we can hear it and handle it. But like, we forget that these were real people who were living the same as we're living today. It's just like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Oh, this just happened. Da, 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 da. It's like, no, imagine if that happened to you today. So I'm very excited to read this.
Yeah, I'm really excited for you to check it out. I hope everyone checks it out, obviously. But, you know, it's a real human story about someone who wanted more for themselves from a very early age and lied the entire way up and down the ladder to get there, but also had this incredible gift as well that we see over and over again. They prove themselves that they're worth it, but how they get to those positions is always a little shady.
Yes. And some things never change. Congress doesn't want to pay their people, and can currently relate to that as
oh my God. The book I want to do next is like about Congress just not paying people.
Oh my God. Like, I will gladly tell you firsthand accounts from how many times currently I'm like the move I'm supposed to do. Congress, they there's a whole thing I'll talk offline about. Yeah, that was just, oh God.
Well, in like post World War I, right? It was like the bank revolt or whatever, and the bonus revolt.
Yeah.
Where all those soldiers were like, you promised us a bonus for fighting in the war. And Congress is like, well, I don't know about that. And so and then these soldiers just occupied the National Mall. Like, they're just like, okay, we're not leaving.
Meanwhile, we have congressmen who should have been out long times ago, stroking out on TV. But politics isn't a part of the comic books, movies, TV shows that we promised you guys. I want to say, as a final thought, let the people who might not know who you are know where they can find your work and all your upcoming exciting projects that you have going on. Yeah,
you can find me online on whatever social media platform is left as of this airing.
It's changing every day.
Changing every day. You can find me at Lost His Keys Man. I lost my keys, man. Or you can just look up my name, Josh Trujillo, Trujillo. Blue Beetle #1 launches in September. Washington Skate General launches on August 15th. You can find me at FlameCon the 12th and the 13th of August in Times Square, New York City, where we'll be debuting the book. And just follow me online for shit posting, honestly.
And relate.
Oh, like that's Matt with our House Geek account.
That is me on I don't know, do we call it Twitter? Do we call it X? Who knows? X gonna give it to you, and I'm gonna give you shit posts. That's what I'm giving to you.
I feel a little freed to write worse tweet. I'm gonna keep calling them tweets because they're
tweets till I die. At this point.
Yeah, I'm just going to tweet harder. And last night I watched Godzilla versus Mothra, and I just live tweeted it like it was 10 years ago. You remember when we were doing that all the time? We're just like, this is what I'm watching tonight. And like, no one does that anymore. And I'm like, well, it's the platform. I'm going to get all my jollies in now before it's too late.
Right. I did that with Walking Dead back in 2010. And then I took like a 10-year hiatus from Twitter until Matt created a Hobbs Geek News account. And I'm like, this isn't what we're doing anymore. I'm not live with Talking Dead hoping they retweet my shit.
Josh, I seriously cannot thank you enough for coming on and hanging out with us. Would love to chat here in the future too, down the road, as we get some more Blue Beetle content, as we get more
please,
wonderful works. You have a home here at the show for whatever that means to you. For us, it means thank you. And we can't wait to see what else you have coming down the pipe.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, guys. I'll be back anytime.
Of course. Well, folks, check out Washington Skate General, The Legend and Loves of Baron von Steuben, and then, of course, Blue Beetle Graduation Day, and then the upcoming run of Blue Beetle, and then, of course, check out the movie as well. It's going to be a great movie. I know people want to complain about superhero fatigue, but at the end of the day, this is going to be a fun movie. It's about heart. It's got family, and you know me, I'm all about that family aspect.
Oh, here we go. I knew it was coming back to Fast and the Furious.
Listen, you know what I'm in the bag for. So check all of these things out. Stay tuned. Check out Josh on social media. Check out all of our stuff at Hobbs Geek News, and we will see you guys next week when Lauren might survive from her 40th birthday. I don't know. She's getting up there now, so we'll see.
I know. I'm still in my 30s this week.
And
happy birthday.
Thank you.
we'll see if I survive my move across the country. More to come. It's like an episode of Dragon Ball Z.